Mr. Murali.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I support the motion. I will deal with three aspects of President Halima's address in my speech: social inequality, cost of living, and the task of our fourth-generation government leaders. President Halima has highlighted, by a good number of members who spoke before me, signal that our government will tackle inequality vigorously. It is important, however, to understand the government's objectives in addressing the issue of inequality. Both within and outside Singapore, political leaders have often incorporated the phrase income inequality in their speeches, but do not necessarily have the same understanding of its impact on its society. We just heard a masterful speech on this same topic by Minister Ong Ye Kung just a few minutes ago. Some political leaders have sounded apocalyptic warnings about the effect of income inequality on society. Some have referred to income inequality as providing people the motivation to do better and improve their lives. Some other opportunistic politicians blame immigration and free trade as contributing factors to income inequality. Doubtless, such accusations can exacerbate divisions within a society. I found the chapter on inequality written by Professor Steven Pinker of Harvard University in his recent book, Enlightenment Now, instructive on this point, and wish to share his insights with honourable members of this House. Professor Pinker asserted that income inequality, usually measured by the Gini coefficient, is not a fundamental component of well-being. It is not a basic right, such as right to health, education, security, etc. He said, and I quote, "Income inequality is not itself a dimension of human well-being and should not be confused with unfairness or with poverty. Nor is decrease in inequality always good. Most effective levelers of economic disparities are epidemics, massive wars, and state collapse," unquote. What is objectionable, therefore, is poverty, lack of mobility arising from low income. Hence, in dealing with income inequality, the primary focus is on tackling poverty, access to important services such as education, health, social mobility, and social mix. We should not conflate inequality per se with unfairness. Against this backdrop, it can be readily appreciated that our government's Gini, or rather the country's Gini coefficient figures, which solely measures income inequality, do not provide a full picture of the government's effort to deal with social mobility, poverty, access to government services among our low-income families, and social mix. I believe Honourable Member Mr. Cedric Foo made the same point earlier. In this context, the government's stated intent in the President's address to open up more progression pathways, celebrate a broader range of success, giving every child a good start in life irrespective of his family circumstance, and help children at risk, deserves this House full support. This is not to say that the government should not be mindful of income inequality. Cost of living issues have a disproportionate impact on low-income families. I note specifically that this government has committed in the President's address to help families cope with costs of living. I wish to deal with the impact of GST on lower-income families. The government often refers to the unique structuring of the GST system with voucher schemes extended to low-income families so as to make GST implementation more, in inverted commas, progressive vis-à-vis them. It is mentioned that for our low-income families, for every dollar they pay in tax, they get about $4 in transfer benefits. Minister Ong Ye Kung just spoke about this when he spoke about, or when he touched on the topic of redistribution to lower-income families in Singapore in his speech just now. As low-income families do not pay much income tax, most of the tax they pay would therefore be GST. I respectfully suggest that in determining the impact of GST on low-income families and measuring the sufficiency of transfer benefits to help them with their cost of living issues, we should not just use how much GST a low-income family pays as a yardstick. The assumption that low-income families use quite a bit of their disposable income in directly paying GST ought to be tested. Let me illustrate this by using purchase of food as an example. It is more likely that a member from a low-income family would buy food from businesses at the wet markets or hawker from a hawker center who are not GST registered, as opposed to a supermarket or restaurant in a shopping center. Yet, hawker and market food prices would naturally be affected by GST, and the low-income family will have to pay higher costs. Hence, pegging amounts of transfer just on how much GST they directly pay would not be sufficient. Ultimately, to ensure that the transfers are sufficient to offset the impact of GST on cost of living, the government must be mindful of the inflationary pressures on the low-income families, especially if their wages do not keep pace. One defining action to ensure social mobility is provision of access to good quality education. This has and will continue to be a great leveler for our society. So long as an individual puts in effort, he or she can achieve good results and enjoy the opportunities it brings. At the same time, the beneficiaries of a system must actively contribute back to society that help them achieve success. This is the Singapore brand of meritocracy that Minister Masagos referred to in his speech yesterday. I wish to share a good example of a product of the Singapore brand of meritocracy. Ms. Chong Hui Sian is an active community leader in Bukit Batok over the past 7 years. She is in her early 30s. She's an auditor with one of the top 4 accounting firms. How did she get there? She's from a modest family background. Her father, now retired, was a kitchen hand at a hotel. She has a sister, a younger sister. Her mother is a full-time housewife. She scored 151 in her PSLE. She could not get into an express or normal academic stream. She went to a normal tech stream at Yusof Ishak Secondary School. From there, she went to ITE West for a year and then to ITE East for 2 years. She did sufficiently well to get into an accounting course in Ngee Ann Polytechnic. By that time, she gained sufficient confidence to compete, in her words, the single O-level pointers. At the same time, she decided that she must do something for our community. She and her friends set up an ITE chapter in Ngee Ann Polytechnic to help ITE students better cope with their studies. She also became a Bukit Batok community leader after graduating from Ngee Ann Poly. She later secured entry into NTU and graduated 3 years later with a second-class upper degree in accountancy. She continues to help youths by sharing her story and motivating them to be the best they can be. Her focus is, borrowing Minister Masagos' words, is on building a good society, not a richer society. I'm heartened to note that the government, in the President's address, pledged to do more in terms of raising the quality of preschools and helping children at risk. I wish to once again raise for consideration of the government the merits of intervening when families do not ensure that their children attend school in contravention of the Compulsory Education Act. The government in the COS debates urged caution. The Honourable Minister, Mr. Desmond Lee, stated that use of legislative levers is insufficient on its own. My point, respectfully, is that there is no legislative lever in the first place. To prevent a permanent underclass from taking root in Singapore, there may be a need to enhance powers of intervention into dysfunctional families who don't send their children to school. This may sound controversial, but so long as the powers are well regulated, used judiciously, I do not see a significant downside. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, if a child, because of the neglect of parents, do not go to school or drops out of school, what are his economic prospects? What is the likelihood of him entering the criminal justice system as compared to a person who completed school? For the Benthamites amongst us, isn't it more likely that in the end, the state will be compelled to spend more money on him to deal with the consequences of him not being in school? One connected issue to the government's agenda in forging a cohesive, caring and inclusive society is the housing policy concerning the physical location of rental flats. This relates to the fourth dimension of income inequality that Minister Ong Ye Kung spoke about in his speech, dealing with social mix. As members know, a good number of standalone rental blocks have been built in the recent past. Yesterday, we heard the Honourable Member, Mr. Ang Wei Neng, forcefully endorsing the government's ethnic mix policy in HDB housing estates. Honourable Member, Mr. Henry Quek, made a clarion call to promote social mixing among classes. Ms. Cheryl Chan suggested renting older housing units to those needing interim housing. I agree with them, and I would go further. I suggest that the government consider going back to the old policy of co-locating rental flats within regular units. I do have a concern with the building of standalone rental flats. Usually they are built at the fringes of mature housing estates. They run the danger of becoming ghettos. We miss a chance of getting family members to mix with family members from these rental flats to mix with members of regular units, in regular units. With better interaction, we promote awareness, empathy for low-income families, and hopefully this will spontaneously generate more help for them. We can also motivate the low-income families to better their lives through their own efforts, mirroring the efforts of their friends in regular units. I now turn to the issue of money, because it's so easy to forget that whilst we want the government to do more to increase social mobility and help with cost of living, our fiscal position, as the Minister for Finance reminds us, is getting tighter and tighter. Without economic growth, and that's the challenge of the fourth generation government leaders, we will face difficulty. We are already spending close to $40 billion on social expenditure, which is a more than 100% increase compared to the figures a decade ago. We cannot afford these figures to go up all the time. We must focus on individual responsibility to slow down increase in social spending and talent development to grow our economy. On the latter point, I don't have time to do justice to this big topic in my speech today, but I wish to share an example which shows that Singapore offers a great platform for innovation and economic opportunities for all, irrespective of their personal backgrounds. I met Mr. Fok Man Hong, aged 48, 2 weeks ago, at his late father's funeral wake in Bukit Batok. He shared with me that his late father, who had no formal education, was his biggest mentor. His father was the sole breadwinner in a family of two children. He recounted that his father used a discarded cardboard, some aluminium foil, and a vegetable steamer to create a personal sauna for just less than $50. Mr. Fok was inspired by his father. He too became an inventor. A graduate of NTU, his Singapore company just discovered enzymes that can dissolve styrofoam. Ordinarily, it takes thousands of years to degrade styrofoam. With this discovery, he plans to take part in Temasek Foundation's Livability Challenge to address urban waste. Hopefully, he'll be able to commercialize his idea, and that will undoubtedly be good, not just for Singapore, but our world. Returning to the issue of addressing the increased costs of social expenditure, there is scope to use data analytics to ensure better targeting and reduce moral hazard. I spoke about this before in the House. I asked why we are still using housing income, or rather household income, as a determinant for social assistance as opposed to family income. I do appreciate the complexity, but I exhort the government to consider utilizing data analytics to get a better picture of who should be helped. I met an elderly couple. They sought financial help over and above the CPF life annuity payment they were getting. Unfortunately, they were not getting sufficient support from their children. When I suggested that they participated in the lease buyback scheme, they demurred, stating that they want to pass on the full value of their flat to their children upon their demise. Responsible parents to the end. So what lessons can we draw from this? All Singaporeans must accept that the government owes them a duty to ensure that each dollar spent for social spending is spent correctly and does not allow the expenditure to balloon beyond what is necessary. Therefore, families must continue to remain as a first line of support. Also, the government needs to leverage more on technology and data analytics to identify families that need government help and advise families who don't of other options. In addition, as a country, as a community, we must always promote family values. Strong family, strong society, strong country. The converse is also true. We should nip in the bud the incidence of well-to-do children passing the buck of taking care of their elderly parents to the state. This does not accord with our nation's values. I now turn to my final topic, our fourth-generation government leaders. I'm heartened to note from the President's address the humility of our fourth-generation government leaders in recognizing that they need to demonstrate leadership and resolve, listen to the views and feelings of our people, and earn the right to lead. This, I believe, will go some way in building the relationship of trust with the people that Honourable Member Mr. Ganesh Rajaram referred to in his cogent speech yesterday in this House. Mr. Ganesh Rajaram also referred to the challenge of communication in today's digital world. As far as communication is concerned, I dare say that the task of the fourth-generation government leaders is likely to be more difficult than it was for our government leaders in previous generations. We all know about the advent of deliberate online falsehoods in social media. We also know about the heightened potential for non-Singaporean players with ulterior motives to influence the Singapore political scene through media platforms. There is now the long tail of expectations and demands, which makes it more difficult for us to reach consensus on policies. This is where we need to forge a climate of constructive politics, always putting Singapore and our people first, and to avoid short-term populist measures that will weaken Singapore. And I'm glad to note that Mr. Pritam Singh, on behalf of the Workers' Party, fully endorsed this principle in his speech. And I take the opportunity to congratulate him on his election as Secretary General of Workers' Party. But constructive politics is not just the domain of MPs and political leaders. All Singaporeans have a part to play. We need to ensure that the environment of trust and respect that exists between our people, political leaders, will continue, while political leaders remain fully accountable to our people for their actions at all times. Everyone has a responsibility to ensure this. If the environment turns toxic, and we are seeing warning signs of this in the digital space, I fear that the repercussion would be that it would be more difficult to attract people with ability and the heart to step up, enter politics, become our fifth-generation leaders and beyond. They, their parents, their spouses may feel it's just too much of a sacrifice for them individually and for their families. This will be dangerous, as in the end, we will not be able to build a strong foundation for future, which was referred to by Minister Chan Chun Sing in his speech yesterday. Our nation will then suffer consequently. So together, in and outside this House, we need to work together to make sure that our politics remain constructive. In conclusion, our fourth-generation leaders deserve the full support of this House in implementing the government's agenda as outlined in the President's address. I wish them well in forging the bonds of trust with our people. I also wish them every success in their endeavour to ensure that Singapore remains, in the word of our President, an exceptional nation.